of moving or investing in Panama? Whether you're starting a business, protecting your assets, or planning for the future, the tricky decision arises. Should you choose a foundation or corporation? When it comes to establishing a business in Panama, understanding the differences between foundations and corporations is crucial for expats. You see, this decision can make or break your success in this beautiful country, and it's essential to get it right from the start. In this video, I'll be joined by Ricardo Faraudo, a prominent Panama lawyer and founding partner of DenFab Law. With decades of experience and thousands of corporations and foundations under his belt, Ricardo will break down the key differences as well as the pros and cons of each option. If you're considering making Panama your home, your business hub, or just your plan B, you won't want to miss his expert insights. Welcome to the Panama Podcast, From Dreaming to Doing. I'm your host, Melissa Darnay, an American who's been living her someday, every day since 2012. Get ready for a weekly dose of Panama sunshine and inspiration, from hilarious expat adventures to insider tips on living, investing, and having a blast in Panama. Curious to learn more? Go to choosepanama.com and snag your free copy of Panama Uncorked. Ricardo, let's just dive right in. What's the main difference between a foundation and a corporation in Panama?
That's a really good question. I would start with corporations overall are meant to do business, and foundations are more legal structures similar to trusts that are more destined to be like the legal structure that holds all your assets. So generally, when you're talking about legal structures, let's say the foundation is used at the top of the pyramid. So the foundation can own other shares of other corporations. The foundation can have investment accounts, bank accounts, etc. So generally, you want to use the foundation as the top of all your different legal structures. It could be even corporations and shares from other jurisdictions. And then the foundation will be the one where you establish also kind of like your will or how you want your assets disposed whenever you're not here. The corporation is more meant to do business and has shareholders. So that's the main difference.
In Panama, a lot of people will put their property, so their apartment, their home, inside of either a corporation or a foundation. Can you talk about the difference and the pros and cons of doing it either way?
Both are great legal structures for owning property. So you can't go wrong with either one. But generally, what I tell my clients is the way I define it is if this is going to be your home, you're moving to Panama, and this is your home, and even if you spend a couple times a year, I recommend foundations because foundations provide you excellent asset protection. They also provide you estate planning and very good inheritance planning because instead of having shareholders, what you have are beneficiaries, and you can establish in the regulations who your beneficiaries are, your secondary beneficiaries and final beneficiaries, and you use that as your will. On the flip side, if you're doing investments and you're going to buy a property and you're going to rent it out, and maybe you're going to buy a second property, and renting is more the reason why you're investing in that regard. I do recommend corporations more because I feel that when you're doing business, the corporation is made for business activity. And in that regard, you have shares and you have shareholders. And for example, you might start as the only shareholder, but let's say your business venture does really well. You bought a property or several properties and they're providing income, and you have a friend or an investor that wants to invest into Panama, but they don't, and you want to sell them 25% of the shares of the corporation. You can do that with corporations. You can't do that with a foundation.
Okay. So someone who's coming to Panama to really invest in property for the purpose of income generation through rent, a corporation's the better structure.
I would recommend the corporation to own the property. Now, if they want further estate planning, they could issue the shares of that corporation in the name of a private interest foundation and then structure that with any other asset that they have in Panama, such as an investment account or bank account. And then in the regulations, establish who their beneficiaries are if something happens to them.
And let's go back to corporations. In the United States, for example, there's an S corporation, a C corporation, an LLC. And here we really just have one type of corporation. How is that different compared to other countries?
Well, we also have a limited liability company. It's called Sociedad de Responsabilidad Limitada, but it's not that commonly used here in Panama. So we mostly use what are called anonymous corporations or SAs. It's kind of a carbon copy of the Delaware law in the United States. So it's our corporations, the one we use, are very similar to the Delaware corporations.
That's great for those people, especially from the United States, who understand that. So it gives a shield, a business shield.
Yes.
Are there any legal limitations on what a foundation or corporation can own in Panama?
No. Specifically, I mean, corporations or foundations are juridical persons, same as a natural person. So an individual like me is a natural person. A corporation, which is a juridical person, and a foundation, which is a juridical person, they have all the rights as a natural person. So they could buy a property, they could buy a car, a boat, open bank accounts, investment accounts, I mean, any sort of business or asset.
Panama is very business friendly that way. Ricardo, can expats easily form either a foundation or corporation in Panama? And if so, what's the process and how long does it take?
Yes, they can. Expats can definitely form legal structures in Panama. Same as citizens, there are no limitations one way or another. The process for forming the corporation is very simple. You know, the registration process, we get corporations and foundations registered in 2-3 business days. So there are certain documents that we need to be filled out. Most, for example, in our case, we have all the documents that need to be filled out in PDF writables that we send to the client. We more or less are set up to do this by email. So once the client tells us that they want, for example, a corporation, we can send them an email with all the forms that need to be filled out. They can send them back to us. And then once we have all the information, we can proceed to register the corporation. In 2-3 days, it's ready. With the foundation, we work very similar. We also send you the forms in PDF writable. But in the foundation, in order to be established as the founder, which is generally the person that controls the foundation, we do need you to sign the public deed. So in that regard, what we do is if you're not in Panama, we'll send you a FedEx package with the public deed with the foundation so you can sign it and you can send it back to us. And then we proceed to register the foundation also in 2-3 days.
And what are the costs associated with forming a foundation versus a corporation?
They're very similar. Generally, a foundation will be around $200 more or less, more than a corporation. So, for example, in our case, we do corporations at $1,400. We do foundations at $1,600. Foundations do have the regulations, which is, for example, the foundation, you have the foundation charter, which is the document that goes to the public registry that establishes the foundation, who the founder, the members of the foundation council, and establishes all the rules of the foundation. That's the public document that goes to the public registry and gets registered. Then you have a private document, which is called the regulation, which is very similar to what, for example, in the US, when you do trust, they call like letters of wishes, where you establish who your beneficiaries are and how you want the assets of the foundation to be disposed if you're not here anymore. So that document, which can be a simple document or a very complex document. So for example, in our foundations, we include 1 hour of legal work for drafting the regulations. So generally it's pretty much included in the foundations. But if it's, for example, going to be a very complicated foundation that has many, many assets, and you're going to put a lot of verbiage, because the foundation is a very ample structure. So it can be quite simple or quite complex. It really gives you a lot of flexibility in how to establish your assets and how they are to be disposed. Then most likely doing the regulations, We'll bill per hour if we go over 1 hour in drafting those regulations at our hourly rate. But generally, let's say they're very similar in price.
So you talk about the regulations, but those aren't submitted to the public registry, so those are private.
Correct. It's a private contract.
Okay, so then if something happens in the trust, the main person passes, then that document needs to be shown at the time of the passing.
Correct. It's similar to like a will.
Okay. How do tax obligations differ between a foundation and a corporation?
I would say that the tax obligations are very similar, if not exactly the same, between a corporation and a foundation. We don't really have separate laws for corporations and foundations in regards to taxes.
Can a foundation or corporation help protect against lawsuits or creditors?
Yes, of course. This is one of the main reasons why we use corporations and foundations. So, for example, in the case of corporations, you can be the shareholder, you can even be in the board of directors of the corporations, but the corporations are only liable up to the value of its assets. So, for example, if you individually have any sort of liability, let's say, give you the classic example, you're driving a car, you get in a car wreck, and whatever damages occur, you are responsible or could be liable for anything. If you have your property, your house in the name of a corporation, they can't go after that. So that's completely protected. It's the same in the foundation. The foundation, you could even say, is even better for asset protection than the corporation. In the foundation, so what you do is the founder donates whatever assets they provide to the foundation. In that case, the foundation owns the assets. So you don't even own the assets. You can control them as the founder, but you don't own them. The foundation owns them.
How does confidentiality work for corporations and foundations in Panama?
So overall, corporations, you can't see who the shareholders are. It's not public information in any, or it's not registered in any public registry. We do have a shareholder registry with our regulator, but that is held completely private and only a couple people have access to that, and that would be very sensitive information. So let's just say overall, third parties can't see who the shareholders of a corporation are. They can only see who the members of the board of directors are. You could be a member of the board of director and also the shareholder, but that would be an assumption, because unless if you have the shares in front of you, you really don't know who the shareholders are. So, for example, people who really don't want to appear anywhere or be linked to that corporation, generally you then don't want to appear in the board of directors, which is what appears in public information in the public registry. Generally, law firms provide service of nominal directors to clients who don't want to appear in the public registry either. But you could perfectly appear in the public registry, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you are the shareholder. As many corporations or many companies, the board of directors, they don't necessarily own shares of the company. In the foundation, let's say it's a little more difficult because generally we will register the founder in the public registry, and you do want to be the founder if you're going to have all the authorizations. And you also have the members of the foundation council, which are registered in the public registry. Since I mentioned initially, so foundations don't have shares. What they have are beneficiaries, and those are named in the regulations, which is a private document. So again, you could perfectly be the founder and control the foundation, but you're not the beneficiary. Maybe your children are the beneficiaries, or somebody else could be a beneficiary, or a trust could be a beneficiary, or another corporation. So that you are the founder does not make you the beneficiary.
Just recently, we did an interview on getting residency in Panama. And for those of you watching this, if you have not seen that, click here to watch it. It's worth the hour you're going to spend watching it. Ricardo, as we're talking about residency, does forming a foundation or corporation make it easier to get residency in Panama, or does it matter?
Okay, so the residency law allows you to buy the property in your personal name in a corporation or a foundation. So you can perfectly structure your assets well through a corporation or a foundation and apply for residency. It's not going to be a problem. And it doesn't make it more complicated at all.
And how about reporting requirements? What are the requirements for both foundations and corporations?
Foundations and corporations are required to have accounting records. That's basically a balance sheet, okay? So, but it's not required to file it. So lawyers who are the resident agents of the foundation or the corporation, they are required to have a copy of the balance sheet or the original. So for example, in our case, we offer our clients the capacity of drafting the balance sheet if they require that service. Some clients already have their accountant and just send us the balance sheet. We then just keep it in custody, or we can tell them, this is your requirement. We can help you do the balance sheet. We do the balance sheet and we keep it in custody. We're not required to file the balance sheet itself in any government authority. We are required to file at the DGI an affidavit saying that we do have a copy of the balance sheet.
Okay. Can a foundation be used to manage inheritance for expats with assets in multiple countries?
Yes, of course. And that's the beauty of the foundation. And I have many clients that have their foundation as the main structure that holds their assets in different countries. For example, you could have a BBI corporation and have the shares issued in the foundation. The foundation can even own property in other countries directly. I have clients who have, for example, let's say an investment account in another jurisdiction in the name of the foundation. So yeah, the foundation can own assets all over the world.
Great. And what happens to a foundation or corporation if the owner passes away?
Well, that's basically, so let's say, because foundations are very flexible and you can draft it in many ways, but let's just talk about the standard. Generally, in the standard foundation, the founder will have all the powers. So in life, the founder can change and amend the foundation charter, change the foundation council. He's the one that issues the regulations and establishes who the beneficiaries are. Once the founder passes on, then in that case, the foundation becomes what you call irrevocable foundation because you can't change it anymore. The foundation council is the one that is left there to oversee that the assets of the foundation are distributed to the beneficiaries as they have been established in the regulations.
I know that in Panama, corporations can be transferred. So my business is Choose Panama Inc. If I want to sell my business, I can sell the shares and somebody else can buy that. Can a foundation be transferred to a new owner?
Not really. Not really. There are probably things that you can do to try to change because the foundation is more about who controls the foundation and who can actually make changes to the foundation charter. So let's say yes, but not really. Like I would never, for example, advise a client to, let's say, if a property is owned by a foundation and a client wants to buy it, I would just say to buy the property, not buy the foundation. You can't really buy the foundation. Now, I do know that there are ways that you can see about providing control by amending the foundation charter and its rules and regulations. So let's say in this case, the buyer winds up with the control of the foundation, but there are things that he will never be able to change. So overall, I don't recommend that. So I want to say no to that. But I also, it is possible.
Okay, a long no.
Yeah.
Ricardo, overall, when someone's going to buy property in Panama, why would you recommend them either using a foundation or a corporation?
Okay, so this is a very good question. That's generally like the first thing that clients ask. And I think it's very important to structure your assets well, particularly when you're investing or buying property in another country. So for example, there are many reasons and examples I can give you. Let's say I have a couple who comes to Panama and they want to buy a property and it's the property they're going to buy together. they're using funds from both parties, and they're going to buy an apartment. But maybe this is not their first marriage, it's their second marriage, and they have older kids, both have different older kids. So I think it's very important to, for example, set up your assets well and establish how they're going to be inherited if something happens to you. That's why we use foundations and corporations to avoid having to go through a long probate process if you have the property in your name, which here in Panama is very long and expensive. Overall, I always recommend clients to just structure their assets well here, because if something happens to them, their inheritors don't live in the country, don't know anything. So I think it's very important to structure your assets well.
Ricardo, as we wrap up, what is your top advice for someone considering forming a foundation or corporation in Panama?
Well, I think it's very important to take into consideration the value of the assets that you're going to put into the corporation or the foundation. Overall, corporation foundations are not that expensive, but they do carry yearly costs and yearly fees. So if you're buying a property, let's say that's worth $100,000, even if it makes sense to structure your assets well, it might not make sense to be paying $700, $800 a year on that asset. But if you're buying a property that's $500,000, then maybe it's a little more sense. If you have a property that is worth $1 million, then paying $800 a year is nothing compared to the value of the asset. So I do think that how much you invest in your estate planning, which is putting in a corporation or a foundation, definitely goes hand in hand with the value of the assets that you're going to have in this country established.
Ricardo, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise. It's been invaluable.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
If you're ready to take the next step, or you have questions about setting up a foundation or corporation in Panama, you can reach out to Ricardo and his team at denfabimmigration.com. So what are your thoughts on business structures in Panama? Have you had to navigate this decision before? Share your experiences and questions in the comments below, and be sure to check out my other videos for more insights on doing business in Panama. Ricardo, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers. See you in Panama.